everyone, and welcome to another edition of Listen Up a Minute. I am John Dowl, your host, and so good to be with you again. As always, I have to thank the people that make this possible. L.J. Brown of L.J. Brown Enterprises, LLC, Derek Wright of Full Motion Videos, and my producer, Audrey Hall, and her daughter, Kawanda Crawley, who helped us out. Without these people, I would be here talking to myself. With that, Dr. Shareef, good to see you again. And I understand you retired a couple of years ago.
Yeah, John. I was going to work until I was 72. I was 70 at the time, but Radford University had a buyout.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a deal I couldn't refuse. So I retired effective July 21st, 2021. So I'm coming up on my second year anniversary of being retired. And
nice.
I'm glad I didn't have to work those extra 2 years. I've really enjoyed being retired.
Oh, good. So I take they had somebody ready to step in and teach the courses that you were teaching and so forth and so on.
Which when you're irreplaceable, they don't have anybody. No, actually, when you have buyouts at universities, usually what happens is the university does it to save money. So you buy out your senior higher paid faculty.
Yeah.
And you also cut courses. So for 32 years, I was the director of the public administration concentration in the political science department. They no longer have that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they no longer have that. So, buyouts are good for a guy like me. They really work. But I think for the institution, they aren't always as good because usually you're going to get courses eliminated, programs reduced.
Right.
A professor will pick up, say, like a public policy course I taught, but there's nobody there to teach the human resource management, organizational theory, those type of courses.
Okay. So I guess they decide, well, for whatever reason, we're going to eliminate this course or that course. And I guess there's some backroom fighting or wheeling and dealing or
always.
However they decide to, for whatever reason, they decide to cut whatever course.
Yeah. It's always, the faculty HCC programs eliminated.
Yeah.
That program that I had for all those years, I was able to send probably 25 students to highly rated Masters of Public Administration program, graduate program. Kids went on to get PhDs. So now that's all eliminated because I'm gone.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to access to some of these leading graduate programs, right?
Okay.
And so again, individually, it benefited me.
Right.
Institutionally, there's a lot lost. There were 30 of them. 30 that buyout. So it's pretty significant.
Something like that, if at some point if they wanted to restart the program, is it difficult to do?
It would be extremely difficult to do. First, you've got to basically hire a senior professor who comes in who has an established publication track record, connections with other programs, etc., to restart it. And then he or she would develop new courses, right, to be taught. And so, it's a lot to restart. I doubt that Radford University or any school, if you look around the country, even Yale recently had buyouts for senior faculty. Now, of course, Yale University has more resources, but it's just difficult to replicate when you lose faculty like that.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's always about the money, man.
Yeah.
It's always. That's why I think everybody should just have a basic understanding of economics, supply and demand, because a lot of questions that appear complicated, if you understand that, you get answers. You don't always like the answers you get, but you get answers, right? They bought us out higher paid senior faculty, right? Tenured faculty. Now they hire newly minted PhDs, assistant professors, and they don't come in with the experience, they don't come in with the connections, they don't come in with the reputation. So it's always this trade-off.
Oh, so it'll take a while for them to build up whatever
Exactly.
they want to do or whatever the university wants.
Exactly. Across the university.
Okay.
Across the university, yeah.
Interesting. It's well, let's get on to what we talked about, what we're here for. And this is you want to talk about a double-blind study, and it's in with the New England Journal of Medicine.
Yes.
Which for people in the medical field, it's one of the top medical journals out there, if not the top one.
Exactly.
For people outside the medical field who may or may not be familiar with it. Talk just a little bit about that particular journal and why.
Okay, well, the New England Journal of Medicine and the Journal of American Medical Association, they're the most highly rated medical journals in the world, actually. And a lot of cutting edge research is published in those journals. And then practitioners look to the research that's published in the journals.
Yes.
To improve treating patients. Public policy people like me look at the New England Journal of Medicine and often design public policy around it. But for our purposes today, John, when something is published, some groundbreaking research is published in the New England Journal of Medicine, it's picked up by the major media outlets.
Yes.
Like the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, NBC, ABC. And that's how the public hears about groundbreaking research.
Okay.
And the research we're going to talk about today was published last fall. And the research methodology, the conclusions, and everything are really suspect. It almost can be called bogus research. And yet the media ran with it, so it influences public opinion about colonoscopy screening.
That is interesting, because I'm glad you mentioned why you looked at it, because someone out there is saying, well, wait a minute, this man is an econ professor, not an MD, or not a medical researcher. So what makes him qualified to talk about this? But you did clear that up.
Well, let me say this, John.
Yes.
And I tell people this all the time. The scientific research methodology, it doesn't matter what discipline you're in, it's always the same.
Okay.
So I could go to a medical school and teach research methodology.
Okay.
And if I could just take 1 minute, I don't want to get deep in the weeds about research, but it's really not hard to understand. Generally, you have a group of people, and you have a hypothesis that if you implement this intervention, this outcome will happen. Right? So with this group of people, you divide them up. You use the term double blind. So people are selected randomly into a group, right?
Yes.
Here we're talking about colonoscopy, right? And the hypothesis, and all the previous research shows that people who get colonoscopy have, it reduces the amount of colon cancer cases and colon cancer mortality.
Okay.
Okay. So in this study, you took 12,000 people in Europe. At least this is the way the study was supposed to be done.
Okay.
You took 12,000 people in Europe, and at least half, or supposedly half, a good study, half would be given colonoscopy, and the other half wouldn't. And your hypothesis or your prediction would be that the group that was given the colonoscopy would have lower cancer rates and lower death rates than the group that didn't.
Right.
Right. That methodology is what is called the scientific approach. It doesn't matter. When I did my doctoral dissertation over 40 years ago, I did a study with the Postal Service, right? And the Postal Service was trying to improve decision making. So they come in with participative management. So I had 400 postal workers in the study. Probably about 45 had the participative management training and were engaged in it, right? The other half didn't. The hypothesis was that those who had participated and were involved in participative management would have higher levels of job satisfaction, reward satisfaction, intrinsic satisfaction, as opposed to those who didn't. So it doesn't matter the field. You
Okay.
can look at the methodology right off the top if you've been trained in this and know whether a study is legitimate or has a strong methodology or the data has been, as we say, cooked.
Yeah.
Particular outcome.
And you said that this publication of a European study that purportedly shows that a colonoscopy procedure does not reduce either colon cancer cases or mortality is flawed. And you said that a key word to me, that the research study that purportedly shows.
Right.
Now, to most people, that might not make a difference, but I know from mass comm law, certain words will trigger certain things.
Well, that's why I put that word there. It purportedly did that. What happened in this study was they invited 12,000 people to the study, right? Only 42% agreed, and those people were given a colonoscopy. The other 58% of people didn't come, and yet that 58% were included in the analysis.
Oh.
So there was really no comparison group.
Right.
The way the study should have been set up was that 42% were given the colonoscopy, the 58% weren't. And you hypothesize that the group that was given the colonoscopy would have these lower rates of colon cancer cases and mortality. There was no comparison group. I mean, it's literally unbelievable what the New England Journal, first of all, what the researchers did, but then what the New England Journal of Medicine editorial board, quote unquote, the gatekeepers, allowed to be published, because there was no comparison group. And what they did was drove down the numbers, obviously, that said that colonoscopy reduced cancer rate and mortality.
Right.
And as soon as I looked at it, right, and so did thousands of
else, that looked at this,
looked at it,
wait
knew
a minute.
immediately the problem. Later in the article, the researchers did pull out the 58% that hadn't had this colonoscopy. And they looked at the 42% that did, and those who did, cancer rates were reduced 31%, and mortality rates were reduced 50%. And that's in line with what studies in the United States have done for the past 50 years. Now, here's the problem. The media ran with the data that was published that included everybody. And so what that said was that colonoscopies didn't really reduce either cancer cases or mortality. And that's a bad thing to put out into the public.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, why would they do something like that? Why would they knew that. I mean, we learned that at least I remember learning that, I think, in 6th grade, when you're setting up experiments. You have to have A and B so you can get an honest outcome.
Exactly. And you use the term double blind, so that means that people didn't know. Or it wasn't a double blind; it was just a blind. Blind, because people knew they were getting a colonoscopy. Well, the first I wrote 2 articles on this. The first just described how screwed up the study's methodology was. The second gets to your question. My first journal publication was in 1984, and I was a doctoral student at the time. And I published an article. Well, I wrote a research paper for a class that called for a market-based approach to healthcare, right? And there's been this debate for the last probably 60 or 70 years in this country. Which approach to healthcare is better? A single-payer plan, and you hear Senator Elizabeth Warren argue for this, Senator Bernie Sanders, and a lot of other people, or a market-based approach. Right? So in 1984, just to complete the requirements in a political economy class, I wrote this paper calling for a market-based approach to healthcare reform. And I outlined why that approach would be superior to a single-payer plan and also how it would cover more people. 25 years later, the blueprint from that article became the Affordable Care Act.
25 years.
25 years later. In fact, I didn't write anything else because my area of interest is organizational change. So that was a big change idea I had. I published it, didn't think anything else about it, and didn't write anything else about healthcare for 25 years until I saw the Affordable Care Act. And the ideas contained in that article were the blueprint. Normally, to get a paper published in my field of public administration policy, you have to have at least 40 references. I only had 7 references in that.
7.
Yes. So most people in this country for a long time have believed that a single payer plan, like they have in Europe, is far better than a market-based approach to bringing people into the system.
Okay.
Until Barack Obama passed the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010. And now clearly the superiority of the market-based approach is evident. You brought 30 million people who didn't have insurance in.
Okay.
And one of the key features of a market-based approach is preventive screening.
Okay.
So colonoscopy, mammograms for women, all these type things, right? The blood test that you do, when you have a regular physical, because the earlier you catch disease, right, the better able you are to either cure it or treat it.
Right.
And so, but this debate has never died. So you have advocates for a single payer plan.
Okay.
The New England Journal of Medicine published this article because it purportedly showed the superiority of a single payer plan, because now the researchers that did this were in Europe over the market-based plan. And the single payer plan does not put an emphasis, because of the lack of resources or the lack of financing in healthcare, does not put an emphasis on preventive screening.
Oh.
Yeah. So if you think about this, for example, and I'll use myself as an example, as a case study. I have a family history of colon cancer.
Okay.
And so since the late 1980s, my internist insisted that I get regular colon screenings, right?
Based on
my family history.
Not just willy-nilly, I want to build the insurance companies based on my family history.
Based on that, yeah. There's a causal relationship between family history of colon cancer and colon cancer.
Yes.
Okay. So I would get the test, right? And this is preventive. And for probably the first 10 years I got those tests, I didn't have any polyps. The polyps that grow into colon cancer. 2001 was the first time I had the doctor found the polyp. So I'm asymptomatic. I don't show any indications of illness. Right. They go in, they found those polyps. They have found them every 3 years since, but they cut them out. They cut them out. They don't grow into malignancy.
Right.
That's how you prevent colon cancer. Okay. And so, as I was talking to you earlier, I had a screening in 2020. This December, I'm going to have another screening. But I've been asymptomatic. I haven't had any problem, right? Because the polyps that are benign at this point, but if not taken out, will turn malignant, are taken out. The European model, because of lack of financing, they wait until you're symptomatic.
Oh.
In other words, you have a bowel movement and you see blood in your stool, or you take a blood stool test and there's blood in your stool.
Well, now let's do something.
Okay. Yeah, now let's do something.
How with the European model, let's say this is done today, Saturday.
Okay.
You call your physician on Monday. How long does it take to get an appointment? Say, pick any country in Europe or Canada, whatever.
Well, I quoted in the article the time it took last year in in Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote that last year in the United Kingdom, more than 4.2 million people were on wait lists last year, and 360,000 waited over 4 months for hospital treatment.
Now, do you get pushed up because I may have an infection on my foot? You have some polyps that may be cancerous, so I'm guessing they're thinking yours may be more severe. Now, assuming I don't have diabetes, so this infection on my foot, if I am diabetic, it might not ever heal, or it's going to take forever. You know, just an infection for whatever reason, that versus a cancerous polyp. So you don't get pushed ahead of the list. We just both wait.
No.
Okay.
So you're thinking about the American model of triage.
Yes.
That's what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
So if you go to the emergency room today and you've got a broken arm, but somebody there has a gunshot wound,
right,
they go in first.
Yes.
No. The European system just doesn't have the resource. So an example would be the VA system in the United States. That's basically a single case.
Okay.
And if you look at wait times and lack of advanced technology, you'll find the same thing. And that's why veterans complain about the VA all the time. And if they can afford it, they will have private health insurance, and the VA is the last place they'll go because of the wait times, the lack of advanced technology, etc. That's common in all single payer plans.
Okay. Now that's interesting because the arguments that I've heard about single payer plan, and these are most recent, I guess, because of my age and what was going on when people were running for office in years past, they say that the single payer plan is best because, and then of course the opponents always say it's worse because. So I guess the proponents will take the best part of the single payer plan. The opponents will take the worst part. Well, and what I guess there's a happy medium, or do we just want to, hey, can we take out the politics if that's possible and just deal with some facts?
Well, I think this, John, one of the strongest arguments for the single payer plan was that it included everybody.
Okay.
Everybody had access to health care, right?
Right.
And that was true in the United States until the Affordable Care Act.
Oh.
All right, because 80% of Americans have health care through their employer.
Yes.
Right? So when I worked for Radford University, I had it through the Commonwealth of Virginia. You work for the federal government. So most people, right? So there's 20% of people who didn't.
Right.
And they had many were poor, but others had pre-existing conditions.
Yes.
So it was almost impossible to get an individual health care plan.
Mm-hmm.
The Affordable Care Act removed all of that.
Yes.
Everybody can get a plan.
Yes.
And it's market-based because you choose between Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, Humana, United Healthcare, whoever has the best policy to fit your needs.
Yes.
And so now everybody in America's market-based plan has healthcare. And one of the really brilliant and ethical things that Obama did with the Affordable Care Act was every policy has to include 10 coverages, and one is preventive screening.
Okay.
Because we know that the earlier disease is caught, again, the greater the likelihood for cure or management of disease.
Yes.
You know, so we talk about cancer having 4 stages, right? And so if you happen to get cancer, you would want to catch it in stage 1 or before.
Yes.
But by stage 2 and stage 3, you're having symptoms. And now you got bigger problems, right? And so that's the advantage. And so it all comes down, as we said earlier, like most things in the world we live in, it comes down to economics. It comes down to finance. And there's just not enough financing to maintain a single payer system.
Okay.
You have to raise taxes. But you can't raise taxes enough to do all the things. that a market-based healthcare system does. Let me say just one more thing about that, because I was trying to think of an example. When you pay a premium, right, to a healthcare company in the United States, they invest that money.
Yes.
Okay. And so think about property and casualty carriers like Allstate, Nationwide, State Farm. You know, every year, especially since climate change has become evident, you have terrible hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico that destroy half of Florida, Louisiana, and Texas, right? And you'll see these newspaper headlines: $1 billion loss, $2 billion loss, right?
Right. Right.
But you notice the State Farm, Allstate, Nationwide never go out of business. They pay the claim. Because when you pay premiums, they invest the money. And so that money grows, so then when they have claims, they can pay it out, right? So you can't raise enough taxes to provide coverage in either healthcare or property and casualty. It has to come from people paying premiums and that money being invested, so that when losses occur, even catastrophic loss, there's money to be paid. So if you think about the Affordable Care Act, before the Affordable Care Act, the private company said, we can't insure somebody with pre-existing conditions. Right. Right. But now that they know that they're going to get guaranteed money from the federal government, I mean, that's what subsidizes. Federal government, our tax dollars, pay 80% of all Affordable Care Act premiums, right? Insurance companies say, okay, you're going to guarantee us 80% of the premium, right? We can take that money and invest it, and you can come in and have stage 4 cancer, and we can cover you and still make money. So I don't even think the argument exists anymore. You just have people who are heavily invested in certain political ideas, ideological ideas like single payer, and they continue to push that idea.
I heard years ago a gentleman on a talk show. He said the Affordable Care Act should have been called the Insurance Reform Act, because now in his estimation it benefited insurance companies as opposed to, I guess, the people, if you will. Your thought? I don't know if you've ever heard that argument or not.
Well, I've heard it, and again, I would just say it's sort of a bogus argument.
Okay.
Right? Here's why. The insurance companies are taking their premium. So say I got a policy under the Affordable Care Act, and it was $100, and the government pays 80%, not $80, and I paid my $20, right? Insurance companies invest that money, but I've got access to any healthcare facility in America. Okay. Right? And so certainly the insurance companies are winning because they're making more profit, right?
True.
But also the citizen who didn't have healthcare now has access to the healthcare system that he or she didn't have before. And the same thing goes for Medicaid expansion. You and I were talking about that earlier. Yeah. Once Medicaid expansion passed in Virginia, 400,000 of the poorest Virginians who couldn't even afford a policy under the Affordable Care Act now have access to the system. Right. So I don't really see how the people are losing. When you now have health care or you have access to the system, there's data to show declining cancer rates, mortality rates, all of these type things. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that people, one of the things in the article, John, I talk about, and I try to stay away from because I don't like to get deep in the woods on this, on using the academic language, but people operate out of what are known as paradigms. You know, it's a worldview. Yes. And research will either confirm or reject an existing paradigm. Yes. But if you're so heavily invested in the paradigm, what's called ego invested in the paradigm, then you ignore any disconfirming evidence to your paradigm. And that's what's going on here. So the New England Journal of Medicine, for example, turned a research study into a self-fulfilling prophet. Yeah. and we don't want self-fulfilling prophecy. We want science to show what works
and what doesn't.
And what doesn't work. And so that's actually what has happened. It's not unusual. And this and in the article I talk about a researcher that was published in the 90s in the Lancet, a very popular and well-regarded British journal, right? That showed that the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination that children get, right?
Yes.
Cause autism,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
John, there were only 12 people in the study.
Now let me stop you right there.
Okay.
I wonder how many people were aware of that. That in this study there were only 12 people, because as you know, there were a whole lot of studies out there, and quite a few providers that said, well, not with maybe one or two people that said, I'm not so sure about these vaccines, but overwhelmingly the majority said, no, this is just silliness, folks. You have to be vaccinated, and the numbers just don't support it.
Right. Well, you know, this you usually have to have at least 100 people in a study for it to be statistically valid.
And they had 12.
They had 12.
12.
All right. So already
12.
the study is both, right?
Right.
All right. And then they cherry pick data. So it was a bogus study. The study was so bogus that the journal later had to issue a retraction. The physician that led the study had his law license taken. But now here's the problem. And you run into the questions of legitimacy and credibility when you publish something like that. That study has triggered the anti-vaccine movement around the world. It's a completely bogus study, but people believe it because it confirmed, because parents are concerned about all of a sudden where does this autism come from?
Okay.
And so if you say the measles, the MMR vaccine created it, there's a causal relationship, then people quit getting their children vaccinated. You come back later and say, okay, this whole thing was a joke. It's too late. People have run with that. And so we see this anti-vax movement. We saw it with COVID.
Yeah.
People were talking about the COVID vaccine. They put a chip in you. You did this and you did that. The COVID vaccine saved lives, right? But that's the danger. Here's one is African Americans that you probably can relate to, and that's the Tuskegee study.
Yes, yeah.
Now in this study, the men back in the 30s, the men in Tuskegee actually had syphilis. They actually had the disease. The U.S. Public Health Service told the men that they were vaccinating them or giving them penicillin to cure syphilis, which it would, but they didn't give them. Okay. They gave them a placebo, right? Because again, here's a social and political agenda that's driving the science. The Public Health Service wanted to see the long-term effects of syphilis on a human being. So this also occurred during the period of the Great Migration. So a lot of these men went to, in particular, went to California.
Right.
And so over the years, the Public Health Service was able to identify quote unquote hotspots in Oakland and LA and San Francisco, everywhere these guys moved because they carried and transmitted the disease.
Right.
So the Public Health Service found out the long-term effects of syphilis, sterility, blindness, insanity, right? They found it out, but it also terrified Black people about getting vaccination.
And participating in medical studies.
And participating in medical studies, yeah. So there's a lot more riding on the line about this medical research than just in the medical community. It has a high social cost, right? Let me give you one other example. There's a landmark U.S. Supreme Court ruling from 1927 case called Buck versus Bell, that allows the state to involuntarily sterilize people that it doesn't want to reproduce.
Right.
Right? Okay. U.S. Supreme Court upheld that, Buck versus Bell. In 1970, Virginia said, we're no longer going to do this. And over the past few years, have given survivors compensation, right? But because that court ruling has never been overturned, it's still law. In the 1980s, California, the state of California, was involuntarily sterilizing 4 Hispanic women who went to the hospital to have babies, right? Okay. Word gets out, big lawsuit filed. I think in 2000, the California legislature said, we're no longer going to do this.
Okay.
But Hispanic women are terrified of the medical community. Yeah. So when COVID came along, the group that was least likely in California and throughout the country
Latino
among Hispanic to get the COVID vaccination was those women. Because we tell these stories, communities tell stories, right? They tell you, you grow up, your parents told you certain things that happen to them to stay away from, right?
Right.
And so the medical community often driven by political or economic or social agendas. When they do these things, it has what I know is high social cost. And those are examples. This study will have that same kind of cost because the headlines on the New York Times and the Washington Post and NPR, they said New England Journal of Medicine study shows that colon cancers don't reduce cancer cases and mortality. So somebody that's been thinking about or needs to get a colonoscopy thinking, you know, I didn't want to do that prep anyway. I don't want them going up in my behind through my, so they don't get it. But then those will be the people who end up with colon cancer.
Yeah. I guess I shouldn't be, but I was a little perplexed as why the media outlets would run that report, that study, the results rather, knowing that it was bogus. Because
well, John, let me say this. Journalists are trained to report the news.
Well, yeah.
Not analyze the news, right? Most journalists, right?
Yeah.
So if something is coming out of the New England Journal of Medicine, then it's a race to who's going to publish it first.
Who's going to get it first? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what happened, and that's why it's incumbent upon, you know, I was a reviewer for 3 of the top journals in the field of public administration policy, right?
Okay.
And so the reviewers and the editorial staff of all journals, or all academic journals, they're known as the gatekeeper.
Right.
So you're supposed to research that's not done properly, that's not well sourced, that doesn't have enough people in the study, whatever. Those manuscripts should be rejected outright.
Right.
Unless the editorial board, again, I come back to this, has a political agenda. Okay. And that's what's evident here.
Yeah.
The single payer plan, people want that. One of the criticisms of the American health plan, market-based health system, is called overdiagnosis.
Okay.
Overdiagnosis, right? So they would look at a guy like me again who has these colonoscopies every 3 years, and I'm asymptomatic. They would say that's overdiagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Now,
to me, yeah, but what does it prevent? It prevents people getting colon cancer.
Yeah.
It prevents radical surgery. It prevents gastric chemotherapy. It presents a lot of social costs to my family and to myself, right? So I don't think it's overdiagnosis at all. And the research shows that, and I point this out in the article, that the detection of breast cancer and other forms of cancer has gone up because of advanced screening, but mortality is down. Now, from where I sit, that's a good thing. From where the single payer people sit, it's a bad thing. Yeah, it's a bad thing.
So you wait, so you don't have to have a colonoscopy because it comes up negative for the first 3 years. So then you go 5 years or 10. I mean, what?
If you don't have any, like my wife, she doesn't have any family history. She didn't have any polyp, so she goes 10 years between screenings.
Okay.
Right. A guy like me who has a family history and polyp, I go every 3 years.
Right.
One of the things the American Cancer Association recently has done is that they want to start. They reduce the age from 50 to 45.
Right.
When people start colon cancer.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that happened. Yeah.
Yeah, because young and younger people are getting and dying from colon cancer. You know the actor Chadwick Boseman.
Oh yeah, yeah,
43.
Yes.
Died of colon cancer, right? So now, at a minimum, if you're asymptomatic, at 45, they want you to have the stool test, where you take a specimen from your stool and send it back to see if there's any blood in it, right? So I've got a son that's 43. In 2 more years, he'll start doing that. He doesn't have to have a colonoscopy, but he does need to have the screening. Simply
because of the family history.
Exactly.
Now, would someone say, well, wait a minute, you're 43, healthy, your lifestyle doesn't really, I guess, suggest that you would have this, would someone say, well, that's it's overdoing it?
John, I was telling you earlier, I thought that back in the 80s. I've been a vegetarian almost 50 years. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I work out regularly. And so when my doctor, Dr. Mal, passed after my grandmother and my father both died in 1987 from colon cancer. So and then I had an uncle in 88 to die. So I looked at their lifestyle. My father and my uncle smoked cigarettes and drank alcohol, and probably had a high-fat, low-fiber diet, right? My grandmother didn't drink or smoke, but I said, well, maybe her diet was high-fat, low-fiber. I don't have any of this. Dr. Bypass said, Reggie, you got a family history, go ahead and get this done.
Right.
Through the 90s, no polyp.
Right.
Beginning in 2001, polyp. Same lifestyle. Same lifestyle.
Right.
And so I don't think that I think there are environmental factors, obviously, that can create polyp. But apparently there's a strong, if not a causal relationship, a correlation.
Yes.
Between family history and polyp. So my children, my daughter's 40, my son is 43. Probably by the time, if they remain asymptomatic, probably by the time they're 50, they're going to have a colonoscopy screening. If they don't have polyps, then again it's 60. But yeah, you have to do this because young and younger people are dying from colon cancer. Right.
Again, in closing, why is this important? And well, let me go back to the gatekeepers for a second.
Okay.
Media people have gatekeepers. It's they're the people who decide, okay, what's going to go out on the 6 o'clock news, and what's going to be printed in the newspapers. Now, this is just old school now with online and podcast, God knows what with that, with social media. However, for someone to have not have analyzed or looked deep and said, wait a minute, this study only had 12 people. Or the New England Journal study they knew that it was just flawed. They wanted a certain outcome. And for them not to at least say, well, these results were based on or it's kind of flawed, or just said, no, we aren't going to do this because it just wasn't an upfront study, if you will.
Well, I tell you, John, I don't think that changes. If you look at now, if you think about the media and gatekeepers there, you look at Fox News,
Yes.
right, about the election.
Yeah.
They said the Dominion
Yeah.
voting machines were flawed on air, but behind the scenes, they knew
They knew.
those machines work perfectly.
Right.
Dominion has a 1.6 billion defamation lawsuit against them,
Mhm.
but in order to keep viewers
Yep. Yeah.
and
Fox kept
satisfy
it
what their
going.
viewers wanted to hear,
Right.
they told a lie. I don't think this is uncommon even in academic publishing. What I like to encourage people to do is just basically understand the experimental research process.
Okay.
And if we've got 30 seconds, let me say it again. Because you don't have to have a PhD to understand this. And then when you see a study, you can intelligently question the validity of the study.
Okay. Okay.
You have to have two groups. One group
Yes.
is called the treatment group.
Yeah.
They're the group that gets the intervention, in this case, the colonoscopy. They're compared with the control group,
Yes.
right, that doesn't get it, right? There's a hypothesis. In this case, that the colonoscopy reduces colon cancer cases and cancer mortality.
Yes.
That's it. If you see something that comes out that says that it doesn't,
Mm.
as a citizen, as a well-informed citizen, alarm bells have to go off.
Right. Right.
You know, you have to say, okay,
Yes.
something is wrong here,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so I think the New England Journal of Medicine dropped the ball. The American College of Gastroenterology, they condemned CNN for running it,
Yeah.
for running this story. It gets off, but what it does, it gets into the environment. And one of the things that I'm writing this column about, and other columns, is about the cognitive biases
Yes.
that we have, right? So here's the bias that the doctors demonstrated here was called anchoring bias. In other words, they have an anchor, or the metaphor, they have an anchor to a particular worldview and outcomes they want.
Yes.
And if they don't get them, then they ignore them and they keep on with that worldview. Most citizens have two cognitive biases when they're trying to make decisions. One is called status quo bias. People don't like change.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're not used to getting colonoscopies and going through the prep like I am, I hear guys all the time saying, man, I don't want that, right? But so that's status quo bias. And then the other is confirmation bias. And confirmation bias occurs that, and it happens a lot in academia and academic research. Confirmation bias says that if we get empirical research from a study that doesn't fit our hypothesis or our thesis, we're going to reject it. And that's why I say then you get into the area of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not what science should do. I think the people at the New England Journal of Medicine really got caught.
Yeah. Yeah.
They want to promote the single payer health system. They cooked this data, they lied, but the pushback was harsh.
Yeah.
So, but for people who aren't reading the New England Journal of Medicine and all that, again, if you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, look at CNN, wherever you look, and you hear something like this, just read further.
Yeah.
To see about the research methodology.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a comparison between those two groups, then you should be highly suspect.
Yes.
Of what this research says it's doing.
Dr. Shareef, on that note, I'm going to let you go, but it's been a pleasure as always, and hopefully we'll get together soon again.
Okay, John, thanks again for a great interview, man.
Enjoy your retirement, folks. That will do it for this edition of Listen Up a Minute. I am John Dowl for everyone involved. Take care of yourselves. See you next time.
All right. Thank you.